The courtroom fell silent as Robert's hands trembled around the worn leather diary. $60 million hung in the balance, but the weight pressing on his chest had nothing to do with money. Across the polished mahogany table, Pastor William Thornton sat with his fingers steepled in prayer, his silver hair catching the fluorescent light like a halo. The same man who had baptized Robert 20 years ago. The same man who had held his hand at Sarah's funeral. The same man who had destroyed his life before he was even born. How had it come to this? How had a simple act of kindness, carrying an old woman's groceries, led to this moment where everything he believed about faith, family, and forgiveness would be tested? But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To understand how Robert found himself holding evidence that could destroy a pillar of the community, we need to go back. Back to when his biggest worry was fixing a leaking roof and making it through another lonely night. Back to before he knew the truth about who he really was. 6 months earlier, Robert had been invisible, and that was exactly how he liked it. The pre-dawn darkness of Grace Community Church had become Robert's sanctuary. At 4:30 every morning, while the rest of suburban Connecticut still slept, he would unlock the heavy oak doors and step into the silence. The smell of lemon polish and old hymnals greeted him like an old friend. For the next 3 hours before the staff arrived and the phones started ringing, the church belonged to him alone. Robert moved through the building with practiced efficiency. Vacuum the sanctuary. Polish the pews. Check the furnace. Replace burned-out bulbs. Clean the bathrooms. Stock the kitchen. Each task completed with care. Each corner attended to as if preparing for royalty. Because in his mind, he was. Sunday mornings brought nearly 800 congregants through these doors, and Robert believed that every single one of them deserved to worship in a space that reflected the glory they came seeking. His reflection caught him by surprise in the freshly cleaned mirror of the men's room. 58 years old, with more gray than brown in his close-cropped hair. Deep lines around his eyes from decades of early mornings and double shifts. Calloused hands that never seemed to get completely clean, no matter how much he scrubbed. Not the face of a man anyone would look at twice. That was fine with Robert. He had learned long ago that being overlooked was a gift. It meant people were genuine around him. It meant he could serve without expectation of recognition. It meant he could process his grief in private, without the well-meaning but exhausting concern of others. Sarah had been gone for 10 years now, but some mornings the loss still felt fresh. He could almost hear her laugh echoing in the fellowship hall, could almost see her arranging flowers on the altar. She had loved this church, had loved the community, the purpose, the sense of belonging. When the cancer came, aggressive and merciless, it was this congregation that had surrounded them with casseroles and prayers and presents. And it was Pastor Thornton who had sat beside Robert in those final hospital hours, who had spoken words of comfort that somehow penetrated the fog of devastation, who had reminded him that death was not the end but a doorway, that faith was not about understanding, but about trusting even when nothing made sense. Those words had kept Robert alive when part of him wanted to follow Sarah into whatever came next. Now, a decade later, his life had settled into a rhythm. Monotonous, maybe. Lonely, certainly. But purposeful. The church needed him. His daughter Emily needed him, even if she was too proud to ask for help very often. His 2 grandchildren needed him, needed the stability of knowing Grandpa would always be there for birthday parties and school plays, even if he couldn't afford expensive gifts. And that was enough. It had to be enough. Robert finished his rounds at 7:15, just as the morning sun began painting the stained glass windows in brilliant colors. He stood in the center of the sanctuary, surrounded by empty pews, and did what he did every morning. He prayed. Not elaborate prayers, not eloquent words. Just simple conversations with God, talking about his worries, his gratitude, his hopes, asking for strength to make it through another day, thanking God for the gift of meaningful work, for health, for Emily and the kids. Praying for the members of the congregation he knew were struggling, the Hendersons, facing foreclosure. Young Tommy Martinez, fighting leukemia. The Johnsons, whose son had overdosed last month. He never prayed for himself. It felt selfish somehow, when so many others had greater needs. What was his loneliness compared to a child fighting cancer? What were his financial struggles compared to a family losing their home? "Morning, Robert." He turned to find Pastor Thornton entering through the side door, coffee in hand, wearing his usual warm smile. Even at 76, the man radiated energy and purpose. His silver hair was perfectly combed, his suit immaculate. He had led Grace Community Church for over 50 years, had baptized hundreds, married thousands, buried countless beloved members. He was an institution, a living legend in their small Connecticut town. "Morning, Pastor," Robert replied, gathering his cleaning supplies. "Got the furnace working again. Should hold through the winter, but we might need to think about replacement soon." "What would we do without you?" Pastor Thornton clasped Robert's shoulder with genuine affection. "You know, I was just telling the board last week that you're the heart of this church. Buildings don't maintain themselves. Your service, your dedication, it's a testimony to real faith, the kind that doesn't need a pulpit or a microphone." Robert felt warmth spread through his chest. Coming from Pastor Thornton, those words meant everything. This was the man who had guided his spiritual journey for over 2 decades, who had shown him what it meant to live out faith in practical, everyday ways. "Just doing my job, Pastor." "It's never just a job when you do it with love," Thornton smiled. "Speaking of which, how's Emily and those beautiful grandchildren?" "Good. Jacob's playing basketball now. Little Sophie just lost her first tooth." Robert's face lit up the way it always did when talking about his grandkids. "Emily is working hard, as always, trying to make ends meet." A shadow crossed Thornton's face. "Still struggling financially?" Robert nodded, uncomfortable discussing it. Emily worked as a dental hygienist, but as a single mother, every month was a juggling act of bills and necessities. Robert helped when he could, slipping her $100 here and there from his security guard paychecks, but it never felt like enough. "You're a good father," Thornton said quietly. Sarah would be proud. The mention of his late wife brought the familiar ache, but also gratitude. Robert nodded, not trusting his voice. After Pastor Thornton headed to his office, Robert continued his morning routine. At 8 o'clock, he drove across town to his apartment, a modest one-bedroom in a complex that had seen better days, showered, ate a quick breakfast, and tried to sleep for a few hours before his night shift at Riverside Mall began at 6. Sleep rarely came easily. The apartment was too quiet, too empty. Sometimes he would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was all there was. Work, sleep, work again. An endless cycle with no variation, no excitement, no companionship. But then he would think of Emily's face when he showed up to watch the kids so she could work an extra shift. He would remember the gratitude in Mrs. Henderson's eyes when he had quietly paid their electric bill last month, telling them it was from an anonymous donor. He would recall the peace he felt in those early morning hours at the church when it was just him and God and honest work. Purpose didn't always look glamorous. Sometimes it looked like calloused hands and an aching back and a bank account that never quite balanced. But it was still purpose. On Sunday morning, the church filled with its usual crowd. Robert arrived extra early, making sure everything was perfect. Fresh coffee brewing in the fellowship hall, hymnals evenly distributed in the pew racks. Temperature set to a comfortable 72 degrees. Bathrooms spotless. He took his usual seat in the back corner, where he could see everything but remain unnoticed. The service began with familiar hymns, voices rising in harmony. Pastor Thornton's sermon spoke about the Good Samaritan, about how faith was demonstrated through action, not just words, about seeing the person everyone else walked past. Robert felt the message settle into his bones. This was why he came. Why he believed. Because faith wasn't just about Sunday morning performances. It was about Tuesday afternoon choices, Thursday evening sacrifices, Saturday morning acts of kindness that no one would ever know about. After the service, Robert was wiping down tables in the fellowship hall when he noticed her. Eleanor Whitney, sitting alone in a corner chair, struggling to gather her belongings. She was a fixture at Grace Community, always present but always solitary. Probably in her mid-80s, dressed in clothes that whispered old money, pearls, tailored suits, expensive handbags. But despite her obvious wealth, she seemed profoundly lonely. Robert had seen her around for years, always sitting in the same pew, third row from the front on the left side. She never joined the coffee hour chatter, never participated in the various ministries or social groups. She would arrive precisely 10 minutes before service, sit ramrod straight through the hour, and leave immediately after the benediction. Today, however, she seemed different, slower, more fragile. Her hands shook as she tried to zip her purse. "Mrs. Whitney?" Robert approached gently, the way one might approach a wounded bird. "Can I help you with anything?" She looked up, and he saw something flicker in her pale blue eyes. Surprise, maybe. People with money weren't used to being offered help by people without it. "I seem to have overdone it this morning," she said softly. Her voice carried the refined accent of old New England aristocracy. "My car is quite far away in the parking lot. I'm not sure I have the energy for the walk." "Let me bring it around for you," Robert offered immediately. "What are you driving?" "The silver Mercedes, but I couldn't possibly—" "It would be my pleasure, ma'am. Just wait right here where it's comfortable." 5 minutes later, Robert pulled her car to the front entrance and helped her settle into the passenger seat. The interior smelled of expensive leather and lavender. Everything about the vehicle screamed wealth, from the heated seats to the dashboard that looked like a spaceship control panel. "You're very kind," Eleanor said as he handed her the keys. "I don't believe I know your name." "Robert, ma'am. I'm the custodian here." "Robert!" She repeated it as if committing it to memory. "Thank you, Robert." He watched her drive away, then walked to his own vehicle, a 15-year-old Honda with a cracked windshield and a temperamental starter. The contrast wasn't lost on him, but he felt no envy, just a quiet satisfaction at having helped someone in need. Have you ever wondered why some acts of kindness echo louder than others? Why a simple gesture, done without expectation, can change the trajectory of multiple lives? Robert didn't know it then, but carrying an old woman's belongings and fetching her car would set in motion events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about faith, family, and forgiveness. Sometimes the most ordinary moments contain extraordinary consequences. And if you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever wondered whether small acts of service truly matter, then you need to hear what happens next. Because Robert's story is not just about inheritance or money. It's about discovering that we are never as alone as we think, and that sometimes the people watching us are the ones we least expect. So stay with us, follow this journey, because what unfolds in the weeks ahead will remind you that every act of kindness creates ripples we may never see, and that faith isn't found in grand gestures, but in the quiet, consistent choices we make when no one is watching. The following Sunday, Eleanor was there again. This time, as Robert made his rounds after service, she approached him. "Robert, I wonder if you might have time this week to look at my front porch railing. It's become loose, and I'm afraid I might fall." "Of course, Mrs. Whitney. I'd be happy to." She handed him a card with her address, Maple Ridge Road, the most exclusive neighborhood in town. Houses there started at $3 million and climbed rapidly from there. That Tuesday evening, before his shift at the mall, Robert drove to Eleanor's home. The word mansion felt inadequate. The estate sprawled across several acres with manicured lawns, gardens that belonged in magazines, and a house that could comfortably fit 10 of his apartments inside. He found the loose railing, tightened it, and while he was there noticed the gutters were clogged. Then he saw a shutter hanging crooked, then a doorbell that wasn't working. Before he knew it, 2 hours had passed, and he had fixed half a dozen small issues. When he knocked on the door to let Eleanor know he was finished, she invited him in for tea. The interior was even more impressive. Crystal chandeliers, artwork that looked museum quality, furniture that probably cost more than most cars. "What do I owe you?" Eleanor asked as they sat in her immaculate living room. "Nothing, ma'am. Happy to help." "Robert, you've spent your entire evening here. You must let me pay you." "Really, Mrs. Whitney, it's fine. You're part of our church family. This is what we do for each other." Something shifted in her expression. Her eyes grew moist. "Not many people think of me as family." Robert understood loneliness when he saw it. He recognized the signs: the too large house, the perfect decorations with no personal touches, the absence of photographs or evidence of regular visitors. "Well, you are," he said simply. "And if you need anything else fixed, you just let me know." That simple offer became a ritual. Every Tuesday evening, Robert would stop by Eleanor's mansion before his security shift. Sometimes there were legitimate repairs: a leaky faucet, a stuck window, a light bulb that needed changing in a fixture too high for her to reach safely. Other times he suspected she invented problems just to have company. They would sit together over tea, and slowly Eleanor began to open up. She told him about her childhood in Boston, about parents who valued reputation above affection, about a life lived in gilt cages. She never married, she explained, though she didn't say why. She had nieces and nephews who called on holidays and birthdays, always with just enough warmth to maintain their position in her will, but never with genuine love. "You remind me of someone," she said one evening, studying his face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Someone I knew long ago." "Yeah? Who's that?" But she just shook her head, a sad smile playing at her lips. "Just someone I wish I had known better." Robert found himself looking forward to Tuesday evenings. Eleanor was educated, well-traveled, and had a sharp wit that surprised him. She asked about his life with genuine interest, about Emily and the grandchildren, about his years with Sarah, about his work at the church. "You have a servant's heart," she observed one evening. "True service, not the performative kind. Do you know how rare that is?" Robert felt embarrassed by the compliment. "I just try to help where I can." "No," Eleanor said firmly. "You do more than try. You live it. Every day, in ways large and small. That's faith in action, Robert, not the kind that needs applause or recognition. The kind that simply exists because it must, because it's who you are at your core." He didn't know what to say to that, so he just sipped his tea and listened as she told him about a trip she took to Venice in the 1970s. Months passed. Summer turned to fall, then winter. Robert's life continued its predictable pattern: church custodian by dawn, handyman for Eleanor on Tuesday evenings, security guard by night, exhausted grandfather on weekends. His body ached more these days. 58 was feeling closer to 70, but he pushed through because people depended on him. Then, one Sunday in March, Eleanor wasn't at church. Robert felt an immediate spike of concern. In the 18 months since he'd started helping her, she had never missed a service. After the congregation dispersed, he called her house. No answer. He drove over during his lunch break. Her Mercedes was in the driveway. He knocked, rang the doorbell, called out. Nothing. Using the spare key she'd given him months ago for emergencies, he let himself in. "Mrs. Whitney? Eleanor?" He found her in the living room, sitting in her usual chair, facing the window that overlooked her gardens. She looked peaceful, as if she had simply fallen asleep while watching the birds at her feeder. But Robert knew. Even before he touched her cold hand, he knew. Eleanor Whitney was gone. The funeral was held 4 days later at Grace Community Church. Robert was surprised by how few people attended. Perhaps 30 mourners, most of them looking like they'd come out of obligation rather than grief. The nieces and nephews Eleanor had mentioned sat in the front row, dressed in expensive black, checking their phones during Pastor Thornton's eulogy. Robert sat in the back, as always, fighting tears he hadn't expected to shed. He had lost a friend. More than that, he had lost someone who saw him, really saw him, in a way few people ever had. After the service, as he was leaving, a man in a charcoal suit approached him. "Robert, I'm Thomas Bradshaw, Mrs. Whitney's attorney. She left specific instructions that I contact you. Would you have time this week to come to my office? There are some matters regarding her estate that involve you." Robert's heart sank. She had probably left him something small, maybe one of the tools he'd used to fix things around her house, or perhaps a modest cash gift. He hoped it wasn't much. Accepting money for what had been friendship felt wrong. "Sure," he said. "I can come by Thursday afternoon." "Actually, I'd prefer if you could make it sooner. Tomorrow, if possible. Say, 2 o'clock. There was something in Bradshaw's expression Robert couldn't read. Urgency, maybe, or concern. "Okay, tomorrow at 2. That night, Robert couldn't sleep. He lay in bed thinking about Eleanor, about their Tuesday evening conversations, about how she had become a bright spot in his routine life. He thought about the way she laughed at his stories about the grandkids, how she always asked follow-up questions that showed she really listened, how she had once told him that his visits were the only thing that made her weeks bearable. He wished he had told her that the feeling was mutual. Tuesday afternoon, Robert put on his only suit, the same one he wore to Sarah's funeral, to Emily's high school graduation, to every wedding and funeral since. It was slightly worn at the elbows and a bit snug around the middle, but it was clean and pressed. He drove to Bradshaw's office in the historic district downtown, a renovated Victorian that housed several law firms. The receptionist led him to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows and a table that could seat 20. Thomas Bradshaw entered moments later, carrying a thick folder and wearing an expression Robert still couldn't decipher. "Robert, thank you for coming on short notice. Can I get you coffee? Water?" "I'm fine, thanks." Bradshaw sat across from him, opening the folder with deliberate care. "I've been Mrs. Whitney's attorney for 35 years. I thought I knew her well, but 3 months ago she came to me and completely rewrote her will. What she asked me to do was unprecedented." Robert felt a flutter of anxiety in his chest. "Okay." "She left you something, Robert, something substantial." "That's very kind, but she really didn't need to. She left you $60 million. The words didn't make sense. Robert heard them, but they seemed to be in the wrong order, or in a foreign language his brain couldn't process. $60 million. That wasn't a number that belonged in his life. That was a lottery number, a movie number, a mistake number. "I'm sorry, what?" "Her entire estate, minus some charitable donations and small bequests to staff, goes to you. The house, the investments, the properties. After taxes and the other distributions, you're looking at approximately $60 million. Robert's vision blurred at the edges. His hands gripped the arms of the chair. "There must be some mistake. I fixed things for her. I was her friend. I know." Bradshaw's voice was gentle. She explained everything. She was very clear, very specific, and very much in sound mind. I have documentation from 3 separate doctors confirming her mental capacity when she made these changes. He slid a sealed envelope across the table. "She asked me to give you this. She wrote it 2 weeks before she passed." With trembling hands, Robert opened the envelope. The letter was written in Eleanor's elegant script on cream-colored stationery. "My dear Robert, if you're reading this, I've gone home at last. Please don't grieve too much. These last 18 months, knowing you, have brought me more peace than all the previous decades combined. You must be shocked by my decision, confused, perhaps even angry that I've placed this burden on you. But please understand, this isn't charity. This isn't a reward for services rendered. This is something far more complicated, far more necessary. You asked me once if you reminded me of someone. The truth is, you didn't just remind me of someone. You are that someone. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Robert, I watched you for years before I ever spoke to you. I saw how you cared for that church as if it were a cathedral. I saw how you treated everyone, from Pastor Thornton to the homeless man who sometimes slept in the doorway, with the same dignity and respect. I saw you slip money to families in need, thinking no one noticed. I saw you stay late to help the elderly down the stairs. I saw you live your faith in ways that most people only perform. And I saw myself. Or rather, I saw who I wish I had been brave enough to be. You once asked why I never married. The truth is, I was pregnant at 16. This was 1966, a different world, especially for families like mine. My parents were horrified. The father was inappropriate, they said, though they never explained why. I was sent away, told I was visiting relatives. And when you were born, yes, Robert, you were taken from my arms before I could even hold you properly. I spent 58 years searching for you. I spent a fortune on private investigators, DNA databases, adoption records. And then, one Sunday, 5 years ago, I walked into Grace Community Church for the first time, trying to find some peace, some forgiveness for what I had allowed to happen to you. And there you were, cleaning, serving, being exactly the man I had prayed my son would become. I confirmed it through DNA, a hair from your coat sent to a private lab. You are my son, Robert, and I am the mother who failed you. I kept silent because I was a coward, because I didn't know how to tell you, because I was afraid you would hate me for giving you away, or worse, that you would feel obligated to love a stranger. But I couldn't die without trying to give you something. Not just money, though God knows you deserve financial security after a lifetime of sacrifice, but truth. You deserve to know where you came from. You deserve to know that you were wanted, desperately wanted by a terrified 16-year-old girl who had no power to keep you. I know this will be difficult. I know you'll have questions I can no longer answer. But please know this. Watching you these last 18 months, having you in my home, hearing about your life, learning who you became despite my absence, it has been the greatest gift of my existence. You gave me back the son I lost. You gave me purpose and peace. You were never a burden, Robert. You were never unwanted. You were stolen from me by shame and fear and the cruelty of people who valued reputation over love. Live well, my son. Use this inheritance not just for yourself, but to do the good I know is in your heart. Be the blessing to others that you were to me, with more love than I ever had the courage to speak. Eleanor Whitney. Your mother. The letter slipped from Robert's hands and fell to the table. The conference room tilted and spun. Mother. Eleanor was his mother. The woman whose toilet he fixed, whose gutters he cleaned, whose loneliness he tried to ease with Tuesday evening visits. She was his mother, and she had known. All along, she had known. I need. Robert couldn't finish the sentence. He couldn't breathe properly. The air felt too thick, too heavy. Take your time, Bradshaw said quietly, pushing a box of tissues toward him. Robert's mind reeled backward through 18 months of memories, seeing them now through a different lens. The way Eleanor studied his face, the questions about his childhood, his adoption, his life, the intensity of her gratitude for the smallest gestures, the tears in her eyes when he called her family. She wasn't being dramatic. She was being literal. How? Robert finally managed. How did I end up in Connecticut? Was I adopted here? Bradshaw pulled out another document. According to the records Eleanor obtained, you were adopted by Richard and Martha, a couple from Hartford. They were good people by all accounts. They passed away in a car accident when you were 19, correct? Robert nodded numbly. He had loved his adoptive parents deeply. They had been kind, supportive, everything parents should be. Their sudden death had devastated him, but at least he'd had Sarah by then and Emily on the way. He had built a new family from his grief. Eleanor's investigation showed that the adoption was arranged through a private attorney who worked with the church. She tried to find you for decades, but the records were sealed. It wasn't until recent changes in Connecticut law, combined with advances in DNA technology, that she was finally able to locate you." "The church?" Robert repeated. "What church?" "Grace Community Church. It was involved in a number of adoptions in the 1960s, apparently. The pastor at that time facilitated connections between young women in difficult situations and couples wanting children. Grace Community. His church. The place that had been his sanctuary, his second home, for over 2 decades. He had been given away through that very building. Who was the pastor in 1966? Bradshaw consulted his notes. A young minister named William Thornton. He had just taken over leadership that year, actually. He was only 26 at the time. The room went very cold. Pastor Thornton. The man who had guided Robert's faith. The man who had been a father figure after his adoptive parents died. The man who had held his hand through Sarah's death and baptized his grandchildren. Pastor Thornton had taken him from his mother's arms. "Are you all right?" Bradshaw's voice seemed to come from very far away. Did she know about Pastor Thornton's involvement? Bradshaw's expression darkened. "Yes. In fact, there's more you need to know. Eleanor documented everything she discovered. She was planning to take action, but..." He paused. "She died before she could." "What kind of action?" "Robert, I think you should go home. Process this. Come back tomorrow and we'll go through everything. This is a lot to absorb in one sitting." But Robert couldn't move. His mother had found him, had watched him, had given him everything she owned. And somehow Pastor Thornton was connected to all of it. What else did she discover? His voice sounded strange to his own ears. Flat, distant. Bradshaw hesitated, then opened the folder again. "Eleanor had reasons to believe that the circumstances of your adoption were not entirely ethical. She had begun investigating possible financial improprieties at the church dating back decades. She also had concerns about how her parents' estate was handled after they died, and suspected that Pastor Thornton might have been involved in mismanaging those funds as well. She believed Pastor Thornton was stealing from the church. She believed it was more complicated than simple theft. But yes, financial misconduct was part of it." Bradshaw closed the folder. "Robert, Eleanor died very suddenly. Her doctors said it was heart failure, completely natural for a woman her age. But she had just completed a full physical 2 weeks prior and received excellent results. She was planning to meet with me the day after she died to discuss bringing formal charges." The implications hung in the air between them like poison gas. "You think someone killed her?" "I think the timing is suspicious. I think she was about to expose something that powerful people wanted to keep hidden, and I think you need to be very careful." Bradshaw leaned forward. "Eleanor's nieces and nephews are going to contest this will. They're already making noise about undue influence, mental incompetence, manipulation. And they have resources, significant resources of their own, as well as connections throughout this state. Let them contest it. I don't care about the money. You should care, Robert. Because if you don't fight for this inheritance, everything Eleanor discovered dies with her. The truth gets buried. The people responsible for taking you from your mother, for whatever else happened, they win. They get away with it." Robert stood abruptly, needing to move, needing air. He walked to the window and stared down at the street below, where normal people were going about their normal lives. People who hadn't just learned that their entire existence was built on lies. "I need to think." "Of course. But Robert..." Bradshaw stood as well. "Don't go to Pastor Thornton. Not yet. Not until you know everything. Promise me." Robert didn't promise. He just took the folder Bradshaw offered, Eleanor's documentation, her research, her final gift of truth, and walked out of the office in a daze. He sat in his Honda in the parking lot for 20 minutes, staring at nothing. Then he drove. Not home, not to the church, not to Emily's house. He just drove, winding through familiar streets that suddenly felt foreign. His mother had found him. His mother had loved him. His mother had died before she could tell him any of this to his face. And Pastor Thornton, the man he trusted, admired, tried to emulate, had been there at the beginning of it all. By the time Robert pulled into his apartment complex, it was dark. He climbed the stairs to his door, unlocked it, stepped inside, and stood in the small living room surrounded by his humble belongings. The worn couch from a yard sale, the TV that only got basic channels, the photographs of Emily and the grandkids in cheap frames. This was his life. Simple, honest, built on faith and hard work. But it was also built on secrets, on a forced adoption, on a mother's stolen child and a lifetime of searching. Robert opened the folder Bradshaw had given him. Inside were bank statements, property records, photographs, letters. Eleanor had been thorough. And what she had discovered was damning. Pastor Thornton hadn't just facilitated Robert's adoption. He had been part of a system that essentially sold babies to wealthy couples. The donations to the church for these adoptions were astronomical, tens of thousands of dollars in 1960s money. And according to Eleanor's investigation, most of that money never made it into church accounts. It disappeared into private holdings, real estate investments, offshore accounts. Pastor Thornton had built his wealth, and he was wealthy, though he hid it well, on the suffering of young mothers and the commodification of their children. There was more. Eleanor's own parents had died in 1985, leaving a substantial estate. As a member of their church and a trusted spiritual advisor, Pastor Thornton had been named executor. Eleanor should have inherited everything. Instead, she received a fraction, with the bulk mysteriously disappearing into various charitable trusts that turned out to be shell corporations. Eleanor had spent the last 5 years of her life quietly gathering evidence. She had hired forensic accountants, private investigators, attorneys specializing in fraud. She had built an airtight case, and then her heart had simply stopped beating. Robert read until his eyes burned and his head pounded. Then he read some more. Bank transfers. Property deeds showing Pastor Thornton owned real estate worth millions. Testimony from other women who had been forced to give up babies in the 1960s and 70s. Evidence of embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy. His phone buzzed. Emily. "Hey, Dad, just checking in. You okay? You sound weird in your voicemail earlier." He had called her? He didn't even remember. "I'm fine, honey. Just tired. You work too hard. Listen, I hate to ask, but Sophie needs new shoes and—" "I'll bring some money by this weekend," Robert interrupted. "Don't worry about it." After they hung up, Robert stared at his phone. $60 million. He could change Emily's life, his grandchildren's lives. He could quit his security job, his exhausting schedule. He could rest for the first time in decades. All he had to do was accept that his mother, his real mother, had been watching him in secret for years, that his adoption had been corrupt, that the man he admired most in the world was a criminal who had profited from his pain. Robert didn't sleep that night. He sat at his small kitchen table, Eleanor's folder spread before him, reading and rereading until the words blurred together. Every page revealed another layer of betrayal, another thread connecting Pastor Thornton to decades of calculated cruelty disguised as ministry. There were letters from young women, dating back to the 1960s, begging to know what happened to their children. Letters that had been sent to Grace Community Church and apparently never answered. Eleanor had tracked down some of these women, now elderly, still grieving losses that time had never healed. One letter particularly gutted him. It was from a girl named Susan, written in 1972, addressed to Pastor Thornton. "Please, I'm begging you. Just tell me if he's okay. I don't want to disrupt his life. I just need to know he's alive and loved. You promised me he would have a good home. You promised you would check on him. I gave you everything I had. The money from selling my mother's jewelry, because you said it would ensure he went to a good family. Please, just one letter telling me he's safe. That's all I'm asking." There was no record of a response. Robert thought about his own mother, 16 years old, probably writing similar letters that also went unanswered, spending 58 years wondering, searching, hoping. At dawn, he called in sick to the church for the first time in 22 years. He couldn't face those walls, that sanctuary, knowing what he knew, couldn't stand in that building where babies had been sold like merchandise. Instead, he drove to Eleanor's house, his house now, legally, though that felt impossible to comprehend. The estate was quiet in the early morning light. He used the key he still had and let himself in. Everything was exactly as she had left it. Her reading glasses on the side table, a book marked with a ribbon, her teacup in the sink. Evidence of a life interrupted mid-sentence. Robert walked through the rooms slowly, seeing them differently now. This wasn't just the home of a wealthy woman who had befriended him. This was his mother's house. These were his mother's things. The paintings on the walls, the books on the shelves, the piano in the corner, all of it chosen by the woman who had given birth to him. In her bedroom, he found more photographs. Eleanor as a young woman, beautiful and sad-eyed. Eleanor with her parents, stiff and formal. And then, hidden in the back of a drawer, a small bundle wrapped in tissue paper. Inside was a hospital bracelet. Baby Boy Whitney, May 15, 1967. 7 lbs, 3 Oz. His hospital bracelet. She had kept it for 58 years. Robert sat on the edge of her bed and wept. Great, racking sobs that came from a place deeper than grief, deeper than anger. This was mourning for everything that should have been and never was. For Tuesday evenings that could have been acknowledged mother-son dinners. For conversations that could have included the word mom. For a lifetime of love that had been forced into silence. When the tears finally subsided, he noticed something else in the drawer. A small journal, different from the large diary Bradshaw had mentioned. This one was recent, just the last few months of Eleanor's life. He opened it to a random page. Robert, fix the porch light today. He didn't mention that he had to work a double shift at the mall afterward. He never complains. I see so much of my father in him. The good parts, the work ethic and integrity that existed before wealth corrupted everything else. I want to tell him. Every week I plan to tell him. But I'm afraid. What if knowing ruins what we have? What if he hates me for the years I stole? Better to love him from this careful distance than to lose him entirely. Robert flipped forward, reading entries that documented her internal struggle. I've decided to tell him everything in my will. It's cowardly, I know, but at least this way, he'll have time to process without me watching, waiting for his reaction. At least this way, if he's angry, I won't have to see the disappointment in his eyes. And he'll have the resources to live the life he deserves. The life I should have given him from the beginning. The final entry was dated 2 days before she died. I met with Thomas today. The will is finalized. I also gave him all my research on Thornton. If something happens to me before I can bring formal charges, Robert needs to know the truth. He needs to know that Thornton isn't the man he pretends to be. My son has built his faith on a foundation of lies, and that breaks my heart almost as much as the years we lost. But Robert is strong, stronger than I ever was. He'll know what to do with the truth. I have faith in him, even if I failed to have faith in myself. Robert closed the journal carefully, reverently. His mother's last thoughts, her final words to him even if she hadn't known they would be final. A sound from downstairs made him freeze. Footsteps. Someone was in the house. He moved quietly to the bedroom door and peered down the hallway. 3 figures stood in the foyer, 2 men in expensive suits and a woman in designer clothes, all of them looking around with expressions that mingled grief with calculation. The nephews and niece. Eleanor's other heirs, the ones who would contest the will. Robert recognized them from the funeral. Brandon, the lawyer, was examining a painting on the wall with an appraising eye. Melissa was photographing the chandelier with her phone. David, the youngest, hung back slightly, looking uncomfortable. "This is all supposed to go to some janitor?" Melissa's voice dripped with contempt. A stranger who probably manipulated her in her final years when she was lonely and vulnerable? We'll contest it, Brandon said confidently. I've already spoken with our attorney. Undue influence is easy to prove when you're dealing with an elderly person and a service worker who had regular access. The courts see this kind of predatory behavior all the time. But what if she really wanted him to have it? David asked quietly. Aunt Eleanor was sharp as a tack. You know that. Whose side are you on? Melissa snapped. This is our inheritance, David, our family's money. Some opportunist does not get to swoop in and steal what's rightfully ours just because he was good at playing the sympathy card. Robert felt anger rise in his chest, hot and unfamiliar. These people who had barely visited Eleanor, who had treated her like an obligation rather than a person, they had the audacity to call him a predator? He started down the stairs, his footsteps deliberate and loud. All three whirled around. Brandon's hand moved toward his pocket, probably reaching for his phone to call the police. I'm Robert, he said flatly, and I have every right to be here. This is my house now. Brandon's expression shifted from alarm to cold assessment. Actually, this house is part of a contested estate. You have no legal right to be here until the will is validated in probate court. And you do? We're blood relatives, Melissa said. You're nobody. The words should have stung, but Robert found them almost funny given what he now knew. He was more Eleanor's blood than any of them, but he wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Not yet. You should leave, Robert said quietly. All of you. Or what? Brandon took a step forward, using his height to intimidate. You'll call the police? Go ahead. We'll explain how a church custodian is trying to steal our aunt's entire fortune. I didn't steal anything. Eleanor left me her estate because she wanted to, because I treated her like a human being, not an ATM machine. You barely knew her, Melissa scoffed. What, you fixed a few things around the house and suddenly you're family? I knew her better than you think. Really? Brandon pulled out his phone. Then tell me, what was her favorite color? Her mother's maiden name? Where did she go to college? When was her birthday? Robert opened his mouth, then closed it. He didn't know any of those things. 18 months of Tuesday evenings, and he couldn't answer basic biographical questions. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Brandon smiled triumphantly. Exactly. You were the help. You knew the version of her she showed to the help. We're her family. We know who she really was. Do you? The words came out before Robert could stop them. Did you know she spent 58 years searching for someone? Did you know she kept a hospital bracelet in her bedroom drawer? Did you know she documented every conversation, every moment, like they were treasures she was afraid of losing? Something flickered in David's expression. What hospital bracelet? Robert realized he had said too much. He stepped back. Just leave, please. We're not leaving until we document everything, Brandon said. We need a complete inventory for the legal proceedings. Melissa, start taking photos. David, check the upstairs rooms. You can't just... Actually, we can. We're direct descendants with a legitimate claim. You're a stranger with a suspicious inheritance. Now, you can either leave peacefully, or we can call the police and explain how we found you trespassing. Robert felt trapped, cornered. He thought about the folder in his car, the evidence Eleanor had gathered. He could destroy them with it, could expose their aunt's findings and show exactly what kind of man they were defending by association. But something stopped him. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the realization that fighting with Eleanor's relatives in her house, while her belongings sat around them like silent witnesses, felt wrong. Fine, he said, but I'm calling the estate attorney. He needs to know you're here. Call whoever you want, Brandon said dismissively, already moving toward Eleanor's study. Robert walked outside, his hands shaking with suppressed rage. He sat in his Honda and dialed Bradshaw's number. They're in the house, he said when the lawyer answered. Eleanor's nieces and nephews. They're photographing everything, claiming they need an inventory. Bradshaw swore quietly. That's actually within their rights as contestants to the will, unfortunately. But Robert, don't engage with them. Don't tell them anything about what Eleanor discovered. And, whatever you do, don't mention your relationship to her. They called me nobody, said I barely knew her. Let them think that. Let them underestimate you. Because when this goes to court, we're going to need every advantage we can get. Bradshaw paused. Have you decided what you want to do? You could walk away from this. Refuse the inheritance. Let them have it and avoid the fight entirely. Robert thought about Eleanor's journal, about her hope that he would know what to do with the truth. No, he said, I'm not walking away. Good, because I've been looking into Eleanor's death more carefully. Her doctor is willing to testify that her heart was healthy, and the coroner's report has some inconsistencies I want investigated further. Robert, if we pursue this, it's going to get ugly. These people have money, connections, and no conscience. They'll dig into every aspect of your life looking for ammunition. Let them dig, Robert said. I have nothing to hide. Everyone has something, Robert. A parking ticket, a disagreement with a neighbor, a complaint from a customer 20 years ago. They'll find it and twist it. Are you prepared for that? Robert thought about his life. Decades of early mornings and late nights, of serving quietly, living modestly, helping when he could. If someone wanted to paint that as sinister, let them try. I'm prepared. After hanging up with Bradshaw, Robert sat in his car and watched Eleanor's relatives move from room to room, visible through the large windows. They handled her belongings carelessly, rifling through drawers, opening cabinets, treating her home like a warehouse to be catalogued rather than a life to be honored. His phone rang. Emily. Dad, are you sure you're okay? You never call in sick. He had forgotten that the church would have notified her. Emily had his emergency contact information on file. I'm fine, honey. Just needed a day. Pastor Thornton called me. He's worried about you. Said you seemed upset yesterday and didn't show up for your shift today. He wanted to make sure you were all right. Of course, Thornton called. Probably wanted to know if Robert had heard anything about the will. I'll talk to him soon, Robert said, trying to keep his voice neutral. How are the kids? They chatted for a few minutes about Jacob's upcoming basketball game and Sophie's school project. Normal life, continuing obliviously while Robert's world cracked apart at the seams. After they hung up, he drove to the church. Not to see Thornton, not yet, but because he needed to look at the building with new eyes. Needed to understand what it had been in 1967, what transactions had happened within those walls. The church was empty on a weekday afternoon. Robert let himself in with his key and stood in the sanctuary. Light filtered through the stained glass, painting the pews in colors that should have felt holy, but now just felt complicated. This was where Eleanor had brought him after finding him, where she had sat every Sunday, watching the son she couldn't claim, worshiping alongside the man who had stolen him. How had she borne it? How had she sat through Thornton's sermons about love and forgiveness and righteousness, knowing what he had done? Robert walked to the church office, to the filing cabinets where old records were kept. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for, but Eleanor's documentation mentioned adoption files that should have been destroyed but weren't. The filing cabinets were locked. Robert had keys to most areas of the church, but not to these, which was interesting in itself. What was in these cabinets that even the custodian couldn't access? He was contemplating his options when he heard the side door open. Footsteps in the hallway. Pastor Thornton's voice calling out, "Robert, someone said they saw your car. Are you here?" Robert stepped out of the office, closing the door behind him. "Yes, Pastor." Thornton's face flooded with relief. "Thank God. We've been so worried. Emily said you were sick, but you never get sick. What's going on?" This man who had been a father to him when his adoptive parents died, who had performed Sarah's funeral, who had taught him that faith meant service, that Christianity was measured in actions, not words. This man who had built his entire ministry on stolen children and embezzled money. "I'm fine," Robert said. "Just needed some time." Thornton studied him with those penetrating eyes that had always seemed to see straight into souls. "You're not fine, I can tell. Is it financial? Because you know the church has a discretionary fund for members in need. You've given so much to this community, Robert. Let us give back." The offer sounded genuine. Thornton was good at sounding genuine. 50 years of practice. "It's not financial. Then what? Please, talk to me. Whatever it is, we can work through it together. That's what faith community means." Robert felt something break inside him. The careful control he had been maintaining since Bradshaw's office, through the sleepless night, through the confrontation with Eleanor's relatives. It all crumbled. "Did you know her?" The words came out raw. "Eleanor Whitney. Did you really know her?" Thornton's expression shifted just slightly. A flicker of something, caution, maybe, or calculation, before the pastoral mask settled back into place. "Of course I knew Eleanor. She was a faithful member of this congregation for years. Her death was a terrible loss. But did you know her before? Before she started coming here 5 years ago?" The pause was almost imperceptible. "I'm not sure what you mean." 1967. A 16-year-old girl, pregnant and terrified. You took her baby. You took me. The silence that followed was absolute. Thornton's face drained of color. His hand reached out to steady himself against the wall. "Robert." "Don't." Robert's voice was shaking now. "Don't lie to me. Not anymore. I know everything. Eleanor documented everything. The adoptions, the money, the fraud. All of it." Thornton seemed to age a decade in seconds. His shoulders sagged. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "She told you. She died before she could tell me anything. But she left me her research, her evidence, her entire estate." "Her estate?" Thornton's eyes widened with understanding. "The will. You're the one she left everything to. I'm her son, the baby you stole from her when she was 16 years old." Thornton moved to a pew and sat down heavily, his hands clasped between his knees. For a long moment, he said nothing. Robert stood in the aisle, waiting, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. "I was 26 years old," Thornton finally said, his voice hollow. "Fresh out of seminary. I thought I was going to change the world. The church was struggling financially, the congregation was aging, and the previous pastor had left us with massive debts. I was desperate to save it." "So, you sold babies." "We called it adoption facilitation." Thornton looked up, his eyes pleading for understanding. These were girls who couldn't keep their children. Girls whose families would disown them, whose futures would be destroyed by the scandal. And there were couples, good Christian couples, desperate for children they couldn't have on their own. We were helping everyone. You were profiting from desperation. The church needed the money to survive. The adoption fees, yes, they were substantial, but they kept the lights on. They paid for ministries that helped hundreds of people. They allowed us to do God's work. Robert felt sick. God's work. You're calling what you did God's work. It was more complicated than you're making it sound. Thornton stood, his pastoral authority reasserting itself. Those were different times, Robert. Unwed mothers were shunned. Their children grew up stigmatized, impoverished, damaged by society's judgment. We gave those children better lives. We gave them to families who could provide everything: education, stability, opportunities their birth mothers never could have offered. You gave me away without asking my mother what she wanted. Your mother was a child herself, 16 years old, still in high school. Her parents were pillars of this community, and she had gotten involved with—" He stopped abruptly. "With who? Who was my father?" Thornton's jaw tightened. "It doesn't matter now. It matters to me. Some truths don't heal, Robert. They only create new wounds. Tell me." Thornton turned away, facing the altar. Eleanor's mother, Catherine, was volunteering at the church that summer. She was beautiful, vivacious, full of life, and I was young and stupid and convinced myself that what I felt was love, not lust. It happened once, just once, and then Catherine found out she was pregnant. The words hung in the air like poison. Robert's mind struggled to process them, to fit them into any framework that made sense. "You're saying—" "I'm saying that Catherine's husband was away on business for 6 months that year. I'm saying that when she discovered she was pregnant, she knew the timing would reveal the truth. I'm saying that her 16-year-old daughter, Eleanor, agreed to claim the baby as her own to save her mother's marriage and reputation." Robert felt the floor tilt beneath him. "Eleanor wasn't my mother. She was my grandmother. Biologically, yes, but she carried you, gave birth to you, loved you as her own. Catherine wanted nothing to do with you. You were evidence of her sin. It was Eleanor who begged to keep you. Eleanor who fought her parents. Eleanor who I had to physically restrain when we took you away." The image was too horrible to contemplate. A teenage girl, giving birth to her mother's child, fighting to keep a baby that had destroyed her life. "And you let them take me. You arranged it." "I had no choice." Thornton's voice cracked. "Catherine's husband was a state senator. If the truth came out, it would have destroyed him, destroyed the church, destroyed me. Catherine gave me an ultimatum. Get rid of the baby quietly, or she would claim I raped her. And who would believe a young minister over a senator's wife? So you chose yourself, your career, your reputation. I chose survival, and I told myself that finding you a good home was the moral thing to do. Your adoptive parents were wonderful people. I made sure of that. I checked on you over the years, made sure you were healthy and happy and loved. You watched me grow up." The realization hit Robert like a hammer. "When my parents died, when I started coming to this church, you knew who I was." Thornton nodded slowly. "I thought God had brought you back to me. A chance at redemption. I could mentor you, guide you, be the father figure I should have been from the beginning. You manipulated me. I loved you." Thornton's voice broke completely. "Everything I did, hiring you, investing in your life, supporting you through Sarah's death, it was all genuine. You are my son, Robert, blood of my blood, and I have spent every day of the last 22 years trying to make up for what I did." Robert wanted to scream, wanted to overturn the pews and smash the stained glass and tear down everything this building represented. But he just stood there, numb and hollow. "Eleanor figured it out," he said quietly. "She discovered that Catherine was actually my biological mother, that you were my father. That's what she was going to expose." Thornton's silence was confirmation enough. "She also discovered that you've been embezzling from the church for decades, that you stole her inheritance when her parents died, that you built a real estate empire on money that should have gone to ministries and missions." "Eleanor had no proof of that," Thornton said quickly, too quickly. "She had everything. Bank records, property deeds, testimony from forensic accountants. She spent years building a case against you, and then she died very suddenly, right before she was going to bring charges." Robert took a step closer. "Did you kill her? Did you kill my grandmother to keep her quiet?" Thornton's face went white. "How can you even ask me that? I'm a man of God. I've devoted my entire life to what? To building a reputation on lies? To profiting from other people's pain?" Robert's voice rose, echoing through the empty sanctuary. "Everything you taught me about faith, about service, about integrity, it was all hypocrisy. You're not a man of God. You're a con artist in a collar. You don't understand the pressures I was under, the impossible choices I had to make. You chose wrong. Every single time, you chose wrong. And now you're going to face consequences." Thornton straightened, and Robert saw a flash of something cold and calculating behind the pastoral facade. "Am I? Because from where I'm standing, You're the one in a precarious position. Eleanor's relatives are already contesting the will. They're claiming you manipulated a vulnerable elderly woman. And if you start making wild accusations about me, about the church, about events that happened almost 60 years ago, who do you think people will believe? I have evidence. You have Eleanor's conspiracy theories. A bitter old woman who spent decades resenting the hand life dealt her, twisting facts to create villains where none existed. Thornton's voice took on the commanding tone Robert had heard from the pulpit 1,000 times. I am a pillar of this community. I've married, baptized, and buried 3 generations of families. I've counseled thousands through their darkest hours. I've built this church from a struggling congregation of 200 to a thriving community of 800. My reputation is unassailable. Your reputation is built on stolen children and embezzled money. Prove it. Thornton stepped closer, his eyes hard. Go ahead. Try to prove that a respected minister, a man who has devoted 50 years to serving God, is actually a criminal. See how far you get. Because I promise you, Robert, you'll lose everything. Your job, your standing in this community, your relationship with Emily and the grandchildren. Because yes, they'll be dragged into this too. Everyone you love will be examined, questioned, scrutinized. Is that really what you want? Robert felt the threat like a physical weight. Emily already struggled financially. If she lost her job because of scandal by association, if the kids had to deal with bullying and gossip because their grandfather accused a beloved pastor of crimes no one would believe, you'd really hurt them, your own grandchildren? I wouldn't hurt anyone. The truth would hurt them. Your choice to destroy this church, to tear apart this community over something that happened before you were born, that is what would hurt them. Thornton's expression softened, became almost gentle. Robert, I'm giving you a way out. Walk away from Eleanor's inheritance. Let her relatives have it. They don't deserve it either, but at least it keeps things quiet. Stay here. Keep working, and I'll make sure you're taken care of. I'll increase your salary, help Emily with her bills, pay for the kids' education. We can move forward together, father and son, the way it should have been from the beginning. You want me to let you get away with everything. I want us both to survive this. Because if you go to war with me, if you try to expose what you think you know, we'll both lose. The church will be destroyed. Hundreds of families who depend on this community will be left adrift. And you'll be labeled a con artist, a gold digger, a liar. Is that really how you want to be remembered? Robert thought about Eleanor, watching him for years, documenting crimes she couldn't prove alone, dying before she could see justice done. She had trusted him to finish what she started, had believed he was strong enough to do what she couldn't. But she hadn't known about Emily and the kids, hadn't understood what Robert would be risking. I need time to think, Robert said finally. Of course. Take all the time you need. Thornton reached out to clasp Robert's shoulder, a gesture that once would have felt comforting but now felt contaminating. Just remember, I'm not your enemy. I never was. I'm your father, Robert. Flawed and human, yes, but your father nonetheless. And everything I've done, everything I'm offering now, comes from love. Robert pulled away from his touch and walked out of the church. Behind him, he heard Thornton call out, "We'll get through this together. You'll see." But Robert wasn't sure about that. Wasn't sure about anything anymore. He drove aimlessly for hours, Thornton's words echoing in his head. The man was right about one thing. A legal battle would be brutal. Brandon, Melissa, and David had resources and motivation to destroy Robert's credibility. And if he simultaneously accused Pastor Thornton of decades-old crimes, it would look like desperation. Like a gold digger throwing wild accusations to justify an inheritance he didn't deserve. But if he walked away, let it all go, what did that say about justice? About truth? About the young mothers whose babies were stolen, the families whose donations were embezzled, the grandmother who spent her final years gathering evidence no one would believe. His phone rang. Bradshaw. Robert, we need to talk. Eleanor's nephews have filed their formal contest. The hearing is scheduled for next month. But there's something else. Something I just discovered in Eleanor's safety deposit box. Can you come to my office right away? Robert arrived at Bradshaw's office within 30 minutes. The attorney was waiting with a manila envelope and an expression that mixed excitement with apprehension. Eleanor was more thorough than even I realized, Bradshaw said, sliding the envelope across his desk. She anticipated that Thornton might threaten you, that he might try to make you choose between justice and protecting your family. So she left you this. Inside were DNA test results. Not just confirming that Eleanor was Robert's biological grandmother, he already knew that. These showed something else entirely. A paternity test comparing Robert's DNA to samples Eleanor had somehow obtained from Pastor William Thornton. 99.9% probability of paternity. She documented how she obtained the sample legally, Bradshaw explained. A coffee cup Thornton left at a restaurant. She wanted you to have proof, scientific proof, that he's your biological father. But there's more. He pulled out another document. A sworn affidavit from a woman named Catherine Eleanor Whitmore, dated 3 weeks before Eleanor died. Robert's hands shook as he read. Catherine, his biological mother, Eleanor's mother, had been dying of cancer in a hospice facility in Maine. Eleanor had found her, visited her, and convinced her to finally tell the truth. The affidavit detailed everything. The affair with Thornton, the pregnancy, forcing Eleanor to pretend the baby was hers, the coerced adoption, the hush money that became blackmail that became decades of Thornton bleeding the Whitney family fortune through, church donations, and investment opportunities. Catherine had signed it, had it notarized, and died 2 days later. This changes everything, Bradshaw said. This isn't just about you anymore. This is documented evidence of fraud, extortion, and possibly multiple crimes. The statute of limitations may have run out on some of it, but the embezzlement is ongoing. We can prove it. Robert stared at the documents. Eleanor had thought of everything, had protected him even from beyond the grave. There's one more thing, Bradshaw said quietly. He pulled out a toxicology report. I had Eleanor's body exhumed. It took some convincing, but her personal physician supported the request based on the suspicious timing of her death. Robert, they found digitalis in her system. High levels. It mimics heart failure, especially in elderly patients. Someone poisoned her. Yes, and given that she was about to expose Thornton, and that he had both motive and opportunity, he visited her 2 days before she died, ostensibly to bring communion to her at home. We have grounds for a criminal investigation. Robert felt the walls closing in. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about murder. What do I do? You fight. You take all of this evidence, you stand up in that courtroom next month, and you tell the truth. All of it. Yes, it will be hard. Yes, Thornton will fight back with everything he has. But Robert, you won't be alone. I've already contacted 3 of the other women who were forced to give up babies through the church. They're willing to testify. I've contacted the district attorney about the embezzlement and the potential murder charges. This is bigger than just Eleanor's will now. Robert thought about Emily and the kids, about the life he had built through quiet service and simple faith, about how exposing all of this would change everything, forever. Then he thought about 16-year-old Eleanor, holding a baby she had carried for 9 months, watching as men took him away while she screamed. He thought about all the other mothers, all the other stolen children. He thought about 50 years of lies preached from a pulpit as truth. Okay, he said, I'll fight. The courtroom was packed on the day of the hearing. Eleanor's relatives sat on one side with their expensive attorneys. Robert sat on the other with Bradshaw. In the gallery, Robert spotted Emily, who had insisted on being there despite his protests. He saw members of the church congregation, confused and curious about why their custodian was involved in a multi-million-dollar inheritance dispute. And in the back row, he saw Pastor Thornton, his silver hair and confident posture radiating moral authority. Their eyes met across the courtroom. Thornton's expression was sad, disappointed, like a father watching his son make a terrible mistake. Brandon's attorney went first, painting Robert as a manipulative opportunist who had taken advantage of a lonely, elderly woman. He presented a timeline of Robert's visits to Eleanor's home, suggesting they showed calculated grooming. He questioned why a wealthy woman would leave everything to a janitor unless she had been unduly influenced. Then it was Bradshaw's turn. He started with the DNA evidence. Showed that Robert was Eleanor's biological grandson. Explained the circumstances of his adoption, the forced separation, Eleanor's decades-long search. The courtroom stirred with murmurs. Then he presented Catherine's affidavit. Read it aloud in its entirety, every damning detail. Explained how Pastor Thornton had extorted the Whitney family for decades, building his personal wealth on blackmail and fear. The murmurs became gasps. Then came the financial records. Decades of embezzlement, clearly documented. Shell corporations, offshore accounts, real estate holdings worth millions, all traced back to church funds that had disappeared into private investments. The courtroom erupted. Brandon's attorney objected frantically. The judge called for order. And in the back row, Pastor Thornton stood and walked out, his face ashen. But Bradshaw wasn't finished. He presented the toxicology report, showed that Eleanor had been poisoned, documented Thornton's visit 2 days before her death, explained that she had been hours away from filing criminal charges when she died. "This isn't about inheritance," Bradshaw told the judge. "This is about justice delayed for almost 60 years. This is about a woman who spent her final years documenting crimes, finding her stolen grandson, and trying to make right what was taken from her. Eleanor Whitney left her estate to Robert not because he manipulated her, but because he is her family, the family that was stolen from her when she was 16 years old." The judge took 2 days to deliberate. When the courtroom reconvened, the atmosphere was electric with tension. After careful review of all evidence presented, Judge Morrison began, her voice steady and authoritative, "This court finds that Eleanor Whitney was of sound mind when she executed her will. The evidence shows not manipulation, but a deliberate choice made by a woman seeking to right historical wrongs and provide for her biological grandson. The contest is denied. The will stands as written." Brandon slammed his hand on the table. Melissa burst into tears of rage. David sat quietly, looking almost relieved. But the judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore, based on evidence of potential criminal activity presented during these proceedings, I am ordering a full investigation into the financial practices of Grace Community Church and Pastor William Thornton. The toxicology report regarding Mrs. Whitney's death has been forwarded to the district attorney's office." Robert felt Emily's hand grip his shoulder from behind. It was over. The inheritance was his. But more importantly, the truth was finally out. The investigation moved quickly once it began. Within 2 weeks, Pastor Thornton was arrested on charges of embezzlement, fraud, and suspicion of murder. His carefully constructed reputation crumbled as more victims came forward. Women who had been forced to give up babies, families who had been defrauded, church members who had trusted a man who betrayed them for 50 years. The case made national news. The custodian who inherited millions and exposed decades of church corruption. Robert hated the attention, but he understood it served a purpose. Every article, every news segment brought forward more people with stories to tell, more evidence to present. Thornton's trial would take months, maybe years. But the evidence was overwhelming. His empire of lies was collapsing, and this time, there was no sermon eloquent enough to save him. Robert stood in Eleanor's house, his house now, though he still couldn't quite believe it, and looked at the photograph he'd found. Eleanor at 16, holding a baby. Someone had captured the moment before they took him away. Her face showed anguish and fierce love in equal measure. "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you," he whispered to the image. "I'm sorry we lost so much time," but he understood why she'd waited. Sometimes love means protecting someone from pain, even at cost to yourself. Sometimes faith means trusting that truth will eventually surface, even if you're not there to see it. Emily found him there, standing in front of that photograph. "You okay, Dad?" "I don't know," he admitted. "Everything I believed about my life, about my faith, about the people I trusted, it was all built on lies." "Not all of it," Emily said gently. "The work you did was real. The people you helped were real. The faith that made you get up at 4:30 every morning to make sure a church was clean and welcoming, that was real. Thornton was a fraud, but your faith wasn't. You lived what you believed, Dad. That's why Eleanor chose you. That's why you won." Robert thought about that, about the difference between the faith he'd been taught and the faith he'd lived. Maybe they didn't have to be the same thing. Maybe faith wasn't about following perfect leaders, but about following truth wherever it led, no matter how painful. "What are you going to do with the money?" Emily asked. Robert had been thinking about that. $60 million was an impossible sum, more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. "First, I'm setting up college funds for Jacob and Sophie, and I'm buying you a house, so don't argue with me about it." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "Dad, let me finish. The rest is going into a foundation for adoption reform, to help mothers who were coerced into giving up children, for investigating other churches that might be running similar schemes, for supporting the families that Thornton defrauded. Eleanor spent her money documenting crimes. I'm going to spend it fixing them." "What about you? You could retire, travel, rest. You've worked so hard for so long." Robert smiled. "I'm going to keep working. Maybe not as a custodian, though I've grown attached to the work, but doing something, building something. I spent 58 years not knowing who I was. Now I know. I'm Eleanor's grandson. I'm the son of a woman who never stopped searching, and I'm going to make sure that legacy means something." Over the following months, Robert did exactly that. The Eleanor Whitney Foundation became a beacon for adoption justice, helping hundreds of families reunite, supporting legislation to open sealed adoption records, providing therapy and resources for mothers still grieving children taken decades ago. Grace Community Church underwent massive restructuring. A new pastor was brought in, one committed to transparency and genuine service. Many members left, unable to reconcile their faith with Thornton's betrayal, but others stayed, determined to rebuild something authentic from the ruins. Robert eventually sold Eleanor's mansion and moved into a modest home near Emily and the grandchildren. The money sat in accounts and trusts doing work, making differences, but not defining him. He was still the same man who got up early, who helped when he could, who lived his faith through action rather than words. Over the following months, Robert did exactly that. The Eleanor Whitney Foundation became a beacon for adoption justice, helping hundreds of families reunite, supporting legislation to open sealed adoption records, providing therapy and resources for mothers still grieving children taken decades ago. Grace Community Church underwent massive restructuring. A new pastor was brought in, one committed to transparency and genuine service. Many members left, unable to reconcile their faith with Thornton's betrayal, but others stayed, determined to rebuild something authentic from the ruins. Robert eventually sold Eleanor's mansion and moved into a modest home near Emily and the grandchildren. The money sat in accounts and trusts, doing work, making differences, but not defining him. He was still the same man who got up early, who helped when he could, who lived his faith through action rather than words. One Tuesday evening, almost a year after Eleanor's death, Robert visited her grave. He brought flowers, lavender, which he'd learned was her favorite. He sat on the grass beside her headstone and talked to her the way he used to talk during their Tuesday visits. "I hope I did right by you," he said quietly. "I hope you'd be proud of what we're building with your legacy. I wish we'd had more time. I wish you'd told me the truth while you were alive, but I understand why you didn't. Sometimes the hardest act of love is staying silent." The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment, Robert felt a peace he hadn't experienced in months. His grandmother had given him more than money. She had given him truth, purpose, and proof that love could survive decades of separation. She had shown him that faith wasn't about perfect leaders or pristine institutions. It was about the quiet choices we make when no one's watching, the kindness we offer without expectation, the truth we pursue even when it costs us everything. Robert stood, touched the headstone one last time, and walked back to his car. Tomorrow he would wake up early, not to clean a church, but to meet with 3 mothers who were searching for children taken in the 1970s. The work Eleanor had started would continue. The truth she had died protecting would keep spreading. And somewhere, Robert believed, she was watching, finally at peace. Robert's story reminds us that our smallest acts of kindness create ripples we may never see, that the truth always finds its way to the surface, and that real faith is tested not in comfort but in crisis. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the people in your own life who serve quietly without recognition, or if it reminded you that justice, though delayed, can still arrive, then share it. Let others know that integrity still matters, that courage can come from the most unexpected places, and that it's never too late for truth to triumph. Because stories like Robert's need to be told, need to be heard, and need to remind us all that we're never as alone as we think, and that love, real love, transcends time, silence, and even death itself. Subscribe and follow for more stories that challenge, inspire, and remind you why faith, family, and truth matter more than fortune.